Hi there, Dave Markham here for Tuesday night class. This is our sixth class. We've been talking about the first principle of Unitarian Universalism. We covenant together to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And we've talked about a lot of things in the previous five classes, such as what is a person, and tonight we are going to talk about what I call the person's not the problem is the problem. And I get this idea from narrative therapy, created by David Epson, a New Zealander, and Michael White, an Australian. And they call this externalization, which means that the person's not the problem is the problem. In English, we misspeak all the time, as if the problem was intrinsic to the person. So we call people alcoholics, schizophrenics, diabetics, as if the illness was the defining characteristic of who they are as a person. It would be much more correct and helpful and constructive to say this is a person for whom alcohol is a problem, or schizophrenia is a problem, or diabetes is a problem. It is incumbent on the individual affected by these problems to identify them and manage them, hopefully constructively. And they can recruit and invite people into their lives to team up with them to work to defeat the problem as well, or at least minimize and diminish it. So when it comes back to this idea of the inherent worth and dignity of every person, we're talking about their spirit, their soul, their innate, unchangeable being, not their behavior. Jesus tried to teach this when he died on the cross, and most people didn't get it. And the predominant theology in the Christian world is that Jesus was sent here by some Father God, awful enough to want his son to be killed to appease his anger with a sinful humanity that God created. That is a very sick, bizarre story. And yet it has been adopted and followed for 2,000 years. In A Course in Miracles, which is narrated by Jesus, Jesus says that this story of the crucifixion is terribly misunderstood. What he intended to demonstrate is that the person is not his or her body, but rather their spirit. And so the Romans killed his body, but they could not kill his spirit, his soul. And his spirit and soul was resurrected and is with us today and has been for the last 2,000 years. So the point, according to Jesus in A Course in Miracles, is that all that you have is your soul, and that your body really has not that much importance. And so as Jesus is dying, according to the New Testament, he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they didn't. In 2,000 years, we're still talking about it. I aspire to be the kind of person who could rise above my ego perception of abuse, hurt, attack, and laugh it off, as they say. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And most of the time they don't. Doesn't mean it doesn't hurt, but it doesn't mean that I have to take it personally either and allow it to hurt me. So if I can forgive them, their attack, injustice, hurt, and rise above it, I'm free to move on in my spirit with peace. Very difficult. I wish I had that presence of mind. I wish my consciousness was raised to that level. And so in Alcoholics Anonymous and other 12-step programs, they usually recite the serenity prayer. Oh God, give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And of course, it's the wisdom that is the most important thing. Reverend Marilyn Sewell says in her book, With Purpose and Principle, Essays about the Seven Principles of Unitarian Universalism, that was edited by Edward Frost. Reverend Marilyn Sewell had an essay on this first principle. And she points out that we often are hypocrites. She writes, quote, though we claim that every life has worth and dignity, many Unitarian Universalists join the approximately 80% of Americans who believe in the death penalty, somehow concluding that committing heinous crimes makes a human being lose status. I think that number probably is lower now. I don't think there's 80% of the American public any longer that support the death penalty. But unfortunately, it's still close to a majority. And we also are very warlike people. You know, we, after 9/11, went to Afghanistan and went to Iraq looking for weapons of mass destruction, which of course now we know was bogus. There weren't any. We tortured people and so on and so forth because we were told that's what we needed to do against these evil perpetrators who intended to do harm to us. And so we are a warlike people who make many negative judgments. And unfortunately, Unitarian Universalists are not much different from the regular American public. So our first principle sounds good in theory. It's easy to pay lip service to it, but when it comes right down to the idea that some people commit heinous crimes, all of a sudden our principle doesn't apply to them and gives us license to behave in ways that's in violation to our principles. So Reverend Marilyn Sewell says, imperfect as we are still called by this first principle into right relationship, and we struggle and stumble to define, describe, and enact these relationships. It is difficult. Reverend Galen Guenrich tells us that the purpose of our faith is to guide us from here to there. Will guide us to become the people and human beings that we want to become and that life calls us to become. Again, I have learned from A Course in Miracles that we are headed towards the at-one-ment, the oneness, the unity that we share with all our brothers and sisters in all of life, which we profess to respect and hold dear in our seventh principle, the interdependent web of all existence. It helps me in application of this principle to make a distinction between the person and the problem. As I've already shared with you, the person's not the problem is the problem. So if we externalize the problem from the person, it can be objectified and managed. If we can't name it, we can't manage it. So being able to come up with a description of the problem that is externalized and not inherent and intrinsic to the person becomes a very important step in applying this first principle. If the person, him or herself, is the problem, then we have a really big problem unless we can control or eliminate their body, which is not them, but merely the container of their indwelling spirit. The idea of the first principle only works well if we recognize that behavior is not what has inherent worth and dignity, and oftentimes we equate behavior with personhood. A huge error on the spiritual plane. This is a huge mistake, and in the daily practice of this principle, the distinction between behavior and personhood must be recognized and taken into account. The person's soul, the person's spirit, has inherent worth and dignity. Sometimes their behavior does, but often it doesn't. So, if we actually were in the same classroom at this point, I'd probably stop sharing this information and I'd say to you, what do you think of this idea of externalization? That the person is not his or her behavior. The person is not the problem is the problem. Is that helpful to you in any way in terms of thinking about yourself or thinking about other people or how you go about living your life? Thank you for being here with me. I appreciate sharing these ideas with you. I hope they're helpful to you. Feel free to use this video in your small group ministry or just for your own personal study. I'd love to hear from you if you care to send me your thoughts and comments on these ideas that we're discussing. That would be a great joy. You can reach me at David G. Markham, M-A-R-K-H-A-M, at gmail.com. davidgmarkham@gmail.com. I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Till then, God bless you. Bye.